Jump off that exhausting hamster wheel and into balanced living with Dr. Marissa.
Promise you joy in the mystery.
Dr. Marissa, also known as the Asian Oprah. Her mission, to be a beneficial presence on the planet. Her purpose, to be your personal advocate to live, laugh, love, learn. Her life motto, don't die wondering. Take back your life with Dr. Marissa Pay.
And welcome. You're tuned in to Take My Advice. I'm not using it. Get balanced with Dr. Marissa, the morning show here on KCAA, NBC News, CNBC News, and NBC Sports radio station, AM 1050, FM 102.3, FM 106.5, and streaming everywhere. iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, Tiki Live, Rumble, Amazon Music, and iTunes, TuneIn, and a whole lot more places. Why? Because I want to maximize my splatter zone for more hope and happiness. Therefore, there's no gossip, no scandal, and no K words, no Kanye talk at all. I want you instead to focus on your own reality show and how you can be happy 88% of the time. And you know me as the Asian Oprah. I was actually introduced to Oprah as the Asian Oprah, and her response was to look at me, look down, look back at me, and say, "Nice pants." And it took everything for me not to say, "Do you want them?" But I am very grateful for that honorable moniker, and I'm so glad that you're here for my show number 747. And it's a perfect number because we are going to take a trip, a flight into a very important topic. And I'm so honored to have two beautiful inside and out women who I came across when I was on location. Some of you know that I do freelance work as a broadcast journalist for a New York news agency, which helps me bring stories that I think are phenomenal onto this show. And this morning I have Beth Kean, who is the CEO of the museum, the Holocaust Museum LA, and the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. She became the museum CEO in January 2016 and interim executive director in November 16, before being appointed CEO in March of 17. She served as the museum treasurer and on the executive board for 10 years prior to that. She has over 25 years of experience working in the financial sector, focusing on fixed income, risk management, and social impact finance. She worked at Capital Group companies in LA and Solomon Brothers in New York, and serves on the University of Pennsylvania's Southern California Regional Advisory Board and Trustees Council for Penn Women. Please welcome to my studio, Beth Kean, and wait for it. And in the middle, we have Franziska, and tell me if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not. Franziska Frank. Dr. Frank is the daughter of Niklas Frank and the granddaughter of Hans Frank, Hitler's Governor General, of occupied Poland, who was sentenced to death at the Nuremberg Trials after the war. Franziska works as a freelance trainer, keynote speaker, and author in 3 languages, German, English, and Russian. Please welcome to my studio, Dr. Franziska Frank. And now that I've affirmed you in, as you can tell, I love to highlight solution. I love to highlight people who are doing great things on the planet. And don't let me forget, I'm going to present both of you with an award at the end of the show, because I am heartened by people who take their light and shine it in areas of darkness. And so when I came across your program, Granddaughters of the Holocaust, I was stopped in my tracks. Just a personal note, Beth, I don't know if Carla told you, my mom was actually unofficially adopted by a Russian Jewish woman who did escape from Russia as well in a wheelbarrow. And my grandma Blum is in heaven now, but I have an Uncle Moishi, an Aunt Ethel, and Aunt Penny, and I know how to find the matzah. So a little bit of a linkage there. And then, as I was saying to Dr. Frank before the show started, ich habe 3 Jahre in die Schule Deutsch gelernt. So I grew up in a very small town with vielen Deutschmen, lots of Germans, largest German settlement outside of Germany in Ontario, Canada. So I feel very close to you, both of you. So there's my personal. And I wanted you to continue on the discussion that was started there at the museum, as well as highlight what you think and why you think it's so important to remember and to learn from the Holocaust. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to do that for me, but I know that there are people out there, Francesca, you highlighted, there are people that want you to stop talking about this. Why keep bringing this up? And we didn't do anything. So that's what today's about. Thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder to listeners, if you are, I see your eyeballs there. If you go to the chat, you can actually write questions or comments as my guests are speaking today. So let's start with the question would be, what do you think are the biggest challenges for us today when it comes to learning from our past? What are the biggest challenges for learning about our past? So who wants to start? On the count of 3, point to the person you want to start.
I can start. Well, first, I just want to say, in the spirit of hope and happiness, the theme of your show, it's truly an honor to be here today. And thank you for, bringing our conversation to this huge audience. We're so grateful for that.
My blessing.
So, my grandparents, as you mentioned, were Holocaust survivors. So for me, there was really never a time in my life where I feel like I did not know about the Holocaust. I just knew from a very young age that my grandparents lost a lot of family members in Auschwitz. And I have, this memory ingrained in my head of at the Jewish holidays, a tray of candles, which I learned later were yahrzeit candles in memory of all of their family members who were killed in the Holocaust. And so there was always this, I knew there was just something horrific that happened in their life. And so, and then fast forward, here I am as CEO of the Holocaust Museum in LA, which is the oldest Holocaust museum in the country, founded by survivors. And what they experienced was so horrific, one of the worst genocides ever in the history of mankind. And it didn't just happen overnight. There were a lot of things that happened along the way that allowed something like the gas chambers to happen. It didn't just fall from the sky, as some of the survivors say. And so that is why, we're seeing history repeat itself. There have been numerous genocides since the Holocaust. And so it is so important for us to learn from the past and, apply, those lessons to what's happening in the world today. We're seeing a lot of ugliness. There's just a lot of, divisiveness, the way people talk to each other. There's so many hate crimes happening, and it escalated during COVID. And, and I always say this, we have a shared responsibility to do something, everyone, in addition to just educating about the history and telling people what happened so that we know, we can learn from the past and prevent these things from happening again. We all have a shared responsibility in that. And we know the importance and the need to speak out when we see something wrong. And we should all be held accountable.
Absolutely. You mentioned LA, I didn't know, is the #1 city for hate crimes, which is not a good thing. and that was surprising but saddening as well. Franziska.
So also, thank you very much for having us on the show. I think it is a wonderful, first, the contact with Beth is really important to me and very heartwarming and very future oriented as well as of course past oriented. So it's wonderful to be here in this group. For me, I think one of the biggest challenges lies in the fact that it's so easy to cognitively learn something from the past, to say, okay, I choose not to become a war criminal. That's quite an easy thing to say. It's also quite easy to say, this is where people should have immigrated earlier. This is where my grandfather should not have gone into Poland, and where he should have stopped. But the question is, where do we really learn for ourselves? Where are we able to take responsibility 100% for what we do? And it's interesting that there's quite a lot of research about how people try and push responsibility away from themselves and how they like to feel victim of circumstances. There's a nice piece of research with 50 war criminals who were asked, so did you do anything wrong? And they more or less said, it was the situation. It wasn't me. It was purely the situation. I couldn't have done something. And I find the danger, particularly also for people like me and my children and people around me. So we cognitively know a lot about the evil that was there. It's very hard to pinpoint, where am I part of an evil now? Where am I prolonging something or passing something down, or where I'm even starting with a small evil, such as, I don't know, a double bind, being too much a helicopter parent, not taking responsibility for when I see something bad happening. So I think that's the big challenge. It's not so much remembering, because that we can with the wonderful museum, with the holograms we have of survivors, with the stories, the great films, but it's actually transferring it into lessons for my heart, for my head, and not to fall into everyday laziness and saying someone else has to do this and take responsibility.
Yeah, the buck stops right over there. That personal sense of responsibility. That's a great point. And it's difficult. I mean, it's easy to say it's their fault or they shouldn't have done that. And that I didn't kill anybody. I wasn't the Germans that say, I not a Nazi. My family was not a Nazi. And I feel put upon by saying that I did something wrong, or it's the Germans that did something wrong. The same that I hear with, the Black slavery. I didn't have slaves. My family didn't have slaves. So, let's just leave the past in the past and move forward. We're not going to solve anything by rehashing the pain of the past, by talking about the pain of the past. I guess you answered that part. Why is it important to continue that? We want to identify what went wrong. But the emotional part of that, I know that there were 2 survivors that were sitting in the audience at the event, and I had to leave to cover another story. But did you have a chance to interact with them? And my father died hating the Japanese because of what they did in Nanjing to his family. Speak to the emotional side of this for me to help me understand, how does one sit with that pain and still feel some hope without drowning in that emotional past?
So if I take this first, so I spoke to the 2 survivors, and one told a wonderful story about how he also initially hated the Germans, and it was important in all his life to always look at where a product came from. And if it was made in Germany, it wasn't bought. And he said in the past years, he has changed. He has said the young generation now, or the present day generation, doesn't really have that much to do with it. So he is slowly opening up. I think there's an interesting piece of research, again, so you see I'm very research oriented, about what happens in our brain. So if we have empathy, empathy is the mirror neurons. It means we suffer with the person who suffered. That makes us very heavy, can lead to depression, burnout, whatever. And a lot of people who are in the helping sector have that. If you go into compassion, that's a different area in the brain, and you can actually train on compassion. There's a famous German neuroscientist who spends a lot of time publishing on that. And if you train compassion, that is actually something where you have the sadness, but it doesn't weigh you down. So it's more as something which drives you towards an action. So it's not that I in any way have to defend myself against the sadness, even though I'm still training. My brain isn't quite as well trained. So I do find it very, 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 very shocking and very, very touching and very emotional to hear the stories of people's past and how many people they lost. And on the other hand, then to turn it into something, look, they've survived. There is new life afterward. So you can actually then shift it into something positive. But not to say that the suffering, second point I'd like to make, I think there's also duty to join in with some of the suffering. So the duty is not, my interest is not to always get into the compassion side, but I think that particularly as a German and as someone who's of a family of perpetrators, it is also my duty to not to replicate, because I can't do that, but to offer myself and to have some of that suffering. It's not my duty or it's not my interest to stay away from that.
Yeah. I was very struck by that. The personal, you take that personal responsibility. You made a very strong statement that it is important to feel that pain, and you want your children to feel that pain. You want Germans to feel that pain and not just brush it off or say it's not in my scope or realm to feel that pain. That was a strong statement. When she says that, when you heard her say that, how did that make you feel? That you who slept in the bed with your grandmother who had nightmares in many nights about what she suffered peeling potatoes in Auschwitz.
Yeah, so just to provide some context around that. Yes, when I was a little girl, I used to have sleepovers with my grandparents, and my grandmother, I'd share the bed with her, and I would wake up in the middle of the night to, hear her nightmares screaming in the middle of the night. And, I never understood really what that was about until much later. But for me, because I understand that pain and how deep rooted it was from the trauma that she experienced as a young, a teenager, being in Auschwitz and then Ravensbrück, where, as you mentioned, she was one of the lucky ones because she got to peel potatoes and sneak the skins, which saved her life ultimately, she used to say. But while I feel this huge sense of responsibility to share these important stories, right, that I grew up with, I have so much admiration and respect for Franziska, because she feels this burden and, responsibility also as, the granddaughter of a Nazi perpetrator. And the fact that, she is so brave to speak out and use her voice, and the fact that she carries this burden and responsibility and is vocal about it, I think is amazing. And I joke around that my grandparents are probably turning in their graves knowing that we're having this conversation. And I adore Franziska, and I call her now, a dear friend. But hatred starts in the home. And, people grow up for no reason hating another group of people without even meeting them. And the survivors, when they speak to young people, when they speak to students, they say, how can you hate someone you've never met before? And when they were teenagers, your best friend is not Jewish. And right after the Nuremberg laws go into effect, all of a sudden your best friend can't talk to you anymore and is calling you a dirty Jew. Well, what changed overnight? So I really do believe, a lot of this starts in the home. And so as parents too, we have this responsibility, to teach our children about being, to be empathetic and open-minded and loving and to treat people with kindness and respect.
And
And
compassion.
if I may add to that, I think to make people aware of the fact when this in and out group happens, and when we see people not as individuals but as part of a group. It happened so interestingly last year in Germany, the year before last, with the English in the football season, in the football championship. I kept on asking people, so who do you want to win, the English or the Italians? And beforehand, it would have been about half. And that time, amongst most of my German friends, people said, oh, the Italians must win because the English are so awful. Brexit, Johnson. And suddenly the English had become a group as a whole. And there was it had gone beyond the football. There had been a slight sort of turning them into an out group. And of course, now it's Johnson's gone. The Brexit unluckily is still there, but so it's shifting. But it's really interesting to my mind that I was able to observe how within a period of a couple of months, people had actually started to talk about the English as one separate group.
Yes, and it's happening here. We used to be able to coexist as red and blue, Republican and Democrat, and now one's in, one's out. There's no middle ground. There's no balance. It's I hate. I wrote an article. United States is like an oxymoron. United, really? Can we even get back there? So, if you've just tuned in and you're wondering who I'm talking to today, it is two women who I'm going to give an award because they are, Franziska's on vacation. This is her last day of vacation. And instead of playing around, what is she doing? She's having this very important conversation with us. They're both granddaughters of the Holocaust. Her grandfather, we're going to talk in a second when we come back from a short break, exactly who he was and what he did, and the relationship between the grandfather and the father, and then the daughter, as well as Beth's grandmother, who was an Auschwitz survivor. We're having this wonderful conversation here on Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It. Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa with the Granddaughters of the Holocaust. We'll be right back on KCAA, the station that leaves no listener behind. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Balanced Tai Chi Gong. My name is Dr. Marissa Pei. For the next 28 minutes, we will be slow dancing with the universe in a moving meditation that promotes inner peace, one breath at a time. Just follow the sound of my voice and move with me as I guide you through this ancient wisdom through New Thought practice. As a corporate psychologist, I created this practice in response to my life and those of my clients. We were professional, high achievement-oriented, multitasking control freaks and exhausted. No matter how many successes, it was never enough. That, coupled with a painful life experience, led me on a quest to find another way to live and back to my Chinese roots. If you practice regularly, I can promise you that it will impact all health vortexes. Body, mind, spirit, soul. You will be in a place of balance and inner peace the way we were created. 谢谢.
Be my partner, Dad.
Take back your life with Dr. Marissa Pei.
And welcome back. You're tuned in to Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It. Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa, the morning show here on KCAA, NBC News Radio, AM 1050, FM 102.3, FM 106.5, and streaming everywhere. iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and my YouTube channel, where you can not only get my past 747 shows, you can also get my red carpet playlist with interviews with Halle Berry, John Travolta, most recently Jimmy Kimmel, and The Temptations backstage, as well as my new short film called PPP, Post-Pandemic Possibilities. And as you saw in the promo, it is the last week of the month coming up. If you're anywhere near Southern California, come to the beach and we'll do Tai Chi, some moving meditation that promotes inner peace, one breath at a time. And I'm happy to bring that to the museum as well, Beth. I was just thinking about that. I'm doing it at the Museum of Latin America that's in Long Beach later on this summer. But I am so delighted to have two women who have taken their normal track in life. Beth was in finance, I'm sure doing very well. Franziska, you were professional doing something, and they now have taken their lives and their energy and their voice to make sure we do not forget the lessons from the Holocaust. So welcome back to the studio. And since I'm bringing you back now, I want to give you both Dr. Marissa's Beneficial Presence on the Planet Award. It's not something I give all my guests, so I hope you receive that with the love and the care that it is meant. I can't even imagine what it is like to wake up every morning to know that it is on your shoulders, part of your job and part of what you've chosen to do, to educate people about the lessons, the hard lessons and the sad lessons and the tragic lessons that came out of the Holocaust. So thank you. Shit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So let's talk about the grandparents. We'll start with Franziska. You learned pretty early from your father, as I understood it, that your grandfather was a bad man, which is interesting. Your father did not defend your grandfather. He, right out of the block, said he's a bad person and this is what he did. Explain that process and how that impacted you as a child.
So I grew up in a house full of books about the Holocaust. So when I was very young, I already looked around and was drawn in with that horrific fascination of the evil in the world. And very quickly, my father sort of fostered this or brought his knowledge into my mind, and also used things like saying, imagine you've been with me and my mother in a cattle car for 2 weeks, and we've been all together. We don't know, there's not enough food, there's not enough space. And now imagine you arrive at the ramp of Auschwitz and someone with his whip stands and puts you in one section and the others in the other section. And you at that moment know you're never going to see me and your mother again. How do you feel? And if you enter that feeling for a very short moment of time with your own parents, he helped me get an inkling, a tiny piece of inkling of what it was like for people to be there. And he told me about my grandfather as someone who really was an evil person. He had begun his journey to write a book against him, which is a very powerful. It's now been retranslated and it's called "The Father: A Revenge." And there is a lot of anger and a lot of fury at how a person can so actually not only mess up their own lives, but cause deaths of thousands. And my grandfather was a cultured man, very good chess player, very good piano player, very well versed in German literature, and very nationalistic. And very taken by Hitler. He became Hitler's personal lawyer, was very proud that he was chosen to defend Hitler in many different circumstances, then became a minister of justice, and then was really happy that he was allowed to come to Krakow and be the general governor of Poland. And he used that, his power to the full. So he loved it on the one hand to enrich himself. he pulled together pieces of artwork, and some have got lost because he hid them somewhere and they've disappeared. There's a, I think it's a Rembrandt which is still lost, which was somewhere where my grandfather used to live. And then he was also in charge of killing off the Polish intelligentsia and ensuring that people were shot and ensuring that a number of concentration camps were working and that the Krakow ghetto was working as it was. So it wasn't very difficult for my father to point out that this was an evil person. And I mean, look at his face. He's the guy on the right, of course, you know that Hitler's on the left. And he doesn't look as someone whom you really want to have as a grandfather. He is not a pleasant person. He had one positive thing for one moment in time. During the Nuremberg Trials, all the defendants were asked to watch, had to watch the video, the first documentary evidence of what had happened during the Holocaust. And it seems that he was actually touched. And when asked whether he pled guilty, he actually said, 1,000 years will not pass and take that guilt from the German people. And there was an uproar that none of the other war criminals had admitted anything like that. He wasn't liked by his crime colleagues. Goering didn't like him. None of the others liked him. And he recanted. On the last day, when he was allowed to again put up his voice, he actually recanted and said, remember what I said about the 1,000 years of guilt? I have to recant because now I've heard what happened to the poor Germans who were asked to leave countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia and had to flee. So even at that moment in time, there was one slight inkling of justice, one slight inkling of responsibility, even though he didn't say I was responsible. He said the German people are responsible. But even he didn't have a tiny inch of humanity to keep that up till the end. So really an unpleasant person. But to add to something you said, it's not a burden. A burden is having a heap of corpses. A burden is the people who died and suffered. Neither my father nor I have any burden. It is a responsibility, and it's in comparison to it's nothing. I think that's really important. There's neither my father nor I are in any way suffering in any relevant sense. So what is relevant is the suffering that my family helped cause together with millions of other Germans.
I get teared up when I hear her. I don't know about you, Beth. Just
Yes.
I mean, I just. It's amazing. So I just, honor that. Thank you for the clarification. It's not a burden. It's a, what did you say? It's not a burden. It's a responsibility. I think that is something. Beth.
I think it's pretty unbelievable that 2 generations later, we could be here side by side having this conversation. And as Franziska, we're the same age. So as she was growing up hearing this, picture yourself, this scenario that her dad was, sharing with her, I actually was hearing the same exact stories from my own grandparents. My grandmother was a young teenager, 13, 14, 15, doing slave labor. And when she left Auschwitz in a cattle car ride in January of 45 in the middle of the winter to go to Ravensbrück, which was an all-women's camp. I heard stories about that cattle car ride and, how packed it was. There was no food. There was no place to go to the bathroom. People were dying around her. And then she would end every story. You just can't imagine because you can't imagine. You really can't.
Right.
But I do think it's so amazing that Franziska and I were like living these parallel lives. And yet, from both sides, her grandfather was responsible really at the end of the day for sending many of my family members to their death, to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. So I know it's just so fascinating to me and unbelievable and amazing that we could have this conversation.
Yes,
And,
it is.
When you were talking before about how we can't be friends with people who think differently or have different opinions, I just think that this is just such a great example.
It is.
Yeah. It just
It really
being
is.
able to have this dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, just for the factual part, I heard of the lawyer. Your grandfather was a lawyer of Hitler. He went up the ranks. You said that at some point, the many different ways he could have said, no, I'm not doing this, or, many places to get off that train, but he didn't, and made it to basically the top tier where he was the governor general of when they took over Poland, right? And that is why he is directly responsible for the sentencing or sending your family to Auschwitz and to the gas chambers, and that's truly amazing. That link in and of itself is uncanny. And I mean, the story, you were on vacation and you came and did this talk at the museum. This was not let's put this together. It's rare that I'm speechless, but the magnitude, I was so excited to have you both, but the magnitude is really starting to sink in. Okay. So now solution. What specifically, if you had a wish for every person who's listening to this, for every person in America, for every person in Germany, for every person who's suffering still, and that generation of survivors is dying out literally 90 years later, right? There's very few survivors left. Let's go to solution. What are some practical things that we can do to learn and make sure that we do not repeat our past?
Well, we do know that education is the greatest catalyst for change. We know that for a fact. So the museum as an institution, we take that job very seriously. And we do know that museums are one of the few places that are looked at as trusted spaces. So, we're thankful that, we just can't rest, and we will start educating, and we will continue to educate as many young people as possible. And we know that that we are actually changing student behaviors, and visitors who walk through, they leave with a sense of responsibility. So that's from the lens of, running a museum. Thanks for sharing our website.
Of course. It's gorgeous, by the way.
We have a fantastic marketing team, Break White Light. Anyway, so from the museum perspective, doing everything we can from an education standpoint, people, always ask me, isn't it depressing working at a Holocaust museum? And I say, no, it's actually quite the opposite. It's really inspiring, because we know that we are, changing student behaviors and making a difference in people's lives. And now we do it virtually and in person. That is one of the silver linings from COVID is that we figured out how to do this hybrid version of educating people. From just a personal perspective, going back to what we were saying earlier, is we all have this shared responsibility, and just, doing a simple act of kindness, treating people with the respect that they deserve, embracing people's differences. The three of us are from, different backgrounds, and just being open-minded to understand, I'm sure we have a lot more in common than not, and try to learn what's important to each one of us and respect that. There are just simple things that we can do. And then, speaking up when you see something wrong, that is another thing, is just being able to have the courage to speak out. If a friend is getting picked on or bullied, or, you just see something that's going on, that is just so important. You need to speak out.
Yes, absolutely. I saw Shanghai Survivor. I'm like, Chinese Survivor. That's I'm going to have to follow up with that with you.
That's so one of our temporary exhibits is about the Shanghai ghetto, and so there were during the war, Shanghai was a safe haven because they didn't require any entry visas. So during the war, about 30,000 Jewish people were living in Shanghai, and it was Japanese occupied territory, but they did not kill the Jewish people. It's a fascinating story, not very well known, but because of the relationship that the Jewish people, the Jewish business people had with the Japanese going back to the early 1900s, the Japanese did not kill the Jews and follow, Hitler's orders. But they didn't live in the best conditions necessarily. They were living in, these in ghettos, but they didn't kill them, and they were able to live in Shanghai freely during the war. Yeah, it's an amazing story, and it's an incredible exhibit.
Yeah. I'll definitely have to visit that. Francesca, what solution?
So I think there's one which really has to do with being aware of the downside of not getting it right. So the reason my father's book caused so much uproar is that he actually broke a taboo. The taboo that, or more or less, people think that children have a duty to love their parents, regardless of what they do. That blood should always be thicker than deeds that people do. And my father broke that pact. And I think it's really important for every single one of us that our children, our relatives, everyone is rightfully is allowed to condemn us, even if they may not have done it better. So there's no guarantee that I would have done it better, but I have to be aware that my children would have a right not only not to condemn me, but also not to love me. So I think that's really important. And what comes out of that is what Beth also said, is that responsibility, and also to see the little steps of evil. Yesterday, I was driving to Portland with the children, and I organized things badly. And I'd realized we made a mistake. And I was beginning to feel victim of circumstances, and I was beginning to take it out on the children. I was saying, why didn't someone do something? And it's that little, I turned around later and everything was fine, and I apologized. But it was one of those things where I felt victim of circumstances. And of course I'm not. I'm voluntarily on vacation. I voluntarily picked the route, and that made me into a nasty person. So to begin, we need to realize, when do we take leave of our senses and become lashing out and create an evil with that. And of course, that's not yet the same. It's not yet the first step on the way to the gallows, but it's not that far off. When you start mistreating people just because you're unhappy in yourself. And like my grandfather, who always thought he was a victim of circumstances, I can't say no to Hitler now. And I do like the riches. And if I step out of this position now, possibly I'm not going to be wealthy enough. So you see, he apologized all his actions by his circumstances. And we humans love feeling victims of circumstances. And I think that is really important every day, to think, I chose to be here. And if I did not choose to be here, then I should do something about it. Or like Viktor Frankl, who of course didn't choose to be in Auschwitz, what can I do regarding my reaction to where I can't choose to leave here? But what I can choose is how I can live with what I didn't choose. So I think those two things: be aware of the taboos, or be aware of the downside if we don't get it right, and also see our own responsibility by not allowing ourselves to be victim of anything.
So eloquently said by Dr. Franziska Frank. Did we point that out?
Yes.
I can listen to you all day long. You speak so eloquently.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does. She's very good at that. How do people? We know how to find Beth at the museum, the Holocaust Museum, LA. Please, if you are at all moved, and I hope you're very moved by this conversation, and you want to take some responsibility, but you don't know how, just simply becoming a member at the museum would be a great way. And I don't think that the memberships are that expensive. They are how much?
$100 to become a member.
So that's not much at all. Or you can just make a donation.
Or you can just come to the museum if you're in Southern California near Los Angeles, come visit us. We're right down the street from the Grove in Pan Pacific Park. And
You
we'd
can
love to
shop.
take you up on your offer to do Tai Chi in the park.
Yeah, I will definitely, we'll work on that. I actually want to be part of this little friendship here. I'm going to like insert myself as the third wheel. Now that you two have bonded.
You're in. You're in.
Francesca, how do people get a hold of you to have you speak at the organizations that you for education?
So I'm both on LinkedIn and I have a web page because I teach on different things. I also teach about decision making, negotiations, and also about humility. I've written a book about humility and actually used my grandfather as someone who obviously did not have it and failed on many, many different steps. So I think just by Googling my name, I can be found. And I also want to add something to what you said about the Tai Chi. So I did a training as an MBSR teacher. And what's really interesting is that and I saw what you do, this important element of teaching our brain to take a bigger picture, the view from the balcony, because that is all that meditation does. It is a strengthening of the left prefrontal cortex against the amygdala, and it's trainable. So this whole thing, what I did yesterday in the car, when I did my little evil with the children, if I had done a little breath meditation while driving, I would have said, now calm down, Franziska. There's anger in you. There's irritation in you. Do the children, are they responsible? No, they're not. So I think that's also very nice. So happy for your insertion to bring your perspective from the Tai Chi side onto this.
Yeah, I call that the 88,000 foot look. You know, whenever we are, you know, in that tunnel vision is to take ourselves out and up, because up stands for unlimited possibilities. And it's a 3-breath technology, breathing in, releasing soft shoulders, soft elbows, soft knees, which is the body, linking the body. And then another breath, releasing all the stories and the drama, which is the mind. And then last breath, connecting through chi, eternal energy, the breath of life. That is spirit. And we are all connected in that one breath, one mind, one soul, one spirit, one people. And that when I take a breath, I take nothing from you as well. So it's a great example of how we are all in this together and how we all really do. We're trying to do better. We're just trying to do better. And I would say, don't be so hard on yourself, Dr. Frank. You're doing a wonderful job as a mom. Absolutely. Any last thing, and you can add on, the last question I usually ask my guests are, to who or what are you most grateful for? To who or what are you most grateful for?
Well, if I may start, it is actually my father, who has been a bulwark against the evil. And the books he's written are so phenomenally clear and wonderfully funny as well, and brutal. And there's so much. He has something called, which I call a holy anger. I'm a historian by training, so I tend to look at things from a neutral perspective quite often. But my father has something very useful because he has that fury and that anger at when things go wrong and when people act badly, and that he really conveys very strongly, both as a speaker, and he's now 83, so he's still putting up a good fight, and as a writer. So I'm most grateful to him for actually opening my eyes and also showing me the power of that holy anger.
And he was subjected to a lot of ostracization.
No.
From your family, but okay.
The siblings.
The siblings. Right? I mean, he was he broke a lot of taboos, you know.
Yes, he did, and his siblings found it very hard to deal with it. That there was someone who had written aggressive books against his parents and against. But his bigger brother, at the very end, actually said, "It was good, Nicholas, that you wrote those books." So there is some sense of peace, and my generation, on the whole, well, no, some of them are also on board. Yeah, let's put it like that.
Thank you. Beth, to who or what are you most grateful for?
I'm grateful for all 4 of my grandparents. So my paternal grandparents emigrated to the United States before the Civil War. And as you know, my maternal grandparents were Holocaust survivors and came here in 1949. And they were best friends. Imagine that, in-laws being best friends. So that was my normal. Here were like blue blood Americans from Germany going back, 7 generations with, immigrants with very thick Polish accents. And they traveled together. And I know that they used to go to restaurants together, and my dad's parents would scope out the restaurant first before they would eat there, just to make sure that my mom's parents would feel comfortable there, as immigrants, learning a new language, or they had been here for a while at that point, but with thick accents, they didn't always feel welcome everywhere they went. So I grew up with that as a role model for me, and I really do believe that shaped who I am today.
Beautiful. What would be your wish for? I'll let you do the Americans, and I'll let you do the Germans. What would be the hope for Americans in all of this, and the hope for Germans, if that made sense?
I mean, I just, my wish is that we live in a world without hate, that, where we do not have to be a divided country. We will open our doors and keep our doors open, for people who are leaving, persecution, like my own family. So, that's what I wish for.
Yeah. Stop the hate, or love instead of hate.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. Francesca?
For the Germans to have an open heart and an open brain. And we are very judgmental as a culture. To be less judgmental and to really listen and to be willing to feel and not have to push things away so that we can stay in control. That's also a tendency in Germany.
Beautiful. Yeah. I just realized we don't have time, but I did just the initial reaction when you hear people actually say Holocaust did not happen. Is there anything we can do with that, with those people, or we just leave them alone? Is it like Thomas Paine, trying to talk some sense into them is like administering medicine to the dead, right? Is there any hope? How do you deal with that?
Well, we can go down a rabbit hole here with social media and how that perpetuates things, misinformation and Holocaust denial and things like that. But I do feel like I can't keep quiet if someone denies something like that in front of me. We
got to speak up.
We have to speak up. Yeah.
What you permit, you promote. I'm getting the signal. We're going to run out of time. So if you would do this with me, peace in, peace out. World peace through, inner peace. This is Dr. Marissa reporting live with the Granddaughters of the Holocaust. Thank you so much for being here. I want to remind all of you to go and have the best day ever. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much again for being part of this broadcast.
Thank you.
All about balance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.